The Toyota Sienna minivan. This is a long-term test. I've driven 4 different trim levels of this on a road trip and moved. So I have a different opinion. If you want a more technical video, I've already done that. It's long, it tells you all the changes, why they did what they did. So check out that video and there'll be some link here as well. So let's get into my experience. We're gonna start with the exterior. And obviously this is subjective, but one thing they tried to do is make it look more aggressive, less conservative, and that whole bullet train look does work in terms of the side and the back profile, but I really, really hate the front grille. It is enormous, it's so much plastic, it has no function other than just trying to look different. And in the concept, it looked way better, like most concept cars, until you get the practical things that you have to do for regulations and safety. Bumper heights, headlight height, like all the things that you have to do, hood height, and it just doesn't look normal. And I don't think it's gonna age well. But again, how many people actually go and buy a minivan and are like, oh man, I gotta have, this thing's gotta be hot. I mean, it's definitely different. I will give them that. The interior, let's get into some of the pros and the cons. Everything is physical in here. This is an interior space, aside from the infotainment, that you're gonna get in a 20-year-old Toyota product, or you're gonna get in here and you're gonna understand how everything works. There's no swipe, there's no capacitive touch, there's no glossy buttons to get dirty, and I really like the usability part of this van because you're not fighting with it. Other than the typical Toyota things where it's constantly beeping for everything, the doors are slow as hell. I mean, those things are still there, and that's, again, it's indicative of every model of this brand. But like things like the analog gauges, simple. The only thing you're gonna really use the screen for, I'll be honest, is to see your miles per gallon. So there's a lot of thought to how do you make this less fatiguing and more normal to operate. Storage space. The doors have a tiered approach where you have the bottom cup holders, the center cubby, and then like where you grab the handle, you can put a phone in there. And while the doors are huge, this is a 24-ounce refillable bottle, and I feel like a lot of people are gonna use that in cars like this or vans like this. This barely fits in the door. And you know, you go to the center storage area, there's a lot of anti-slip stuff where you put your phone, and then there's some like really slippery plastic up here, so if you drive hard, things are constantly flying around. The under storage bin is anti-slip, which is good. It's a huge chasm, and this is great for bags and stuff, or things that aren't loose. So if you have bags, you can stuff it. Like you could probably fit a smaller detergent bottle here, or like a 6-pack of like Coke or something. And then the armrests are really padded and they're even, so you're not getting this like long, like pinched effect and longer drives. But because of this chasm down here, they sacrificed the center armrest storage area. It's really tiny compared to like a lot of like SUVs and other like trucks. It's definitely a disappointment here. I feel like they could have balanced it out better, but what are you gonna do? The biggest negative about these lower trim levels is the seats. And it's not really so much about adjustability as they're so hot. They feel like it's like this pleather and there's no perforation. So in the summer, like right now, my ass and my back are just completely sweaty. And you get it on longer road trips. No matter how cold you have the interior, you're constantly sweating in it. Adjustability is good on the driver's side, and you have a really high like position, driving position. The passenger seat, unfortunately, you're stuck at high only. You can't lower the seat down. In the backs, the 2 sliding captain's chairs are great. You can slide them all the way back and you turn it into a cargo hold in that second row. And of course, the sliding rear doors are amazing. Once you use those, it's really hard to go back to an SUV because you get in and out of there so quickly. Or if you load kids in there or cargo, it's like that. There's no like leaning in and pinching and bumping into the doors. When you take stuff out, you're not blasting doors. Amazing. But the big problem with this van is you can't take out the second row. And they don't fold into the floor like the non-hybrid Pacifica. And that's where the Pacifica is amazing, but when you get in the hybrid, you lose that. So that's kind of like a wash. And they probably did it for safety because of the airbag modules in it. And it's possible they did it because the battery pack's under the floor, like in this area. So you can't put the seats into the floor like the Pacifica. The third row is really great. They're usable, and the recline function is really good, and there's a bunch of ports back there. The way that the HVAC controls work in the back are great. There's a good way to split the climate up, and it's easy to control for your back passengers. When everything's down, again, huge pro, I can fit a queen-size bed. Granted, I had to fold it in a little bit. You did have to bend it, and a full-size bed in there, plus a bunch of cargo. And I think that's what goes to show you with this is it's really 100% appliance. and it is very, very usable, and no unibody SUV can touch it in terms of usability. And believe me, I tried. I went from an XC90 to an X7, and every time I want to use something, I would rather have the minivan. You just don't fight with it. And I think that's a good time to get into the shop segment. I'm going to talk about some of the things they did and why they are the way they are. Since we're talking about the pros and the cons of the Sienna, I wanted to take a minute to explain why this van is the way that it is, but I'm not going to take too long on that. Now first, kind of got to thank these guys, Chrysler, Plymouth, Dodge, FCA, Stellantis, or whatever 25 other brands are going to own them in the decade, for essentially creating this segment. And then Honda and Toyota have evolved it. And with this generation of Sienna, I was kind of lukewarm to it when it came out. I was like, I don't know. I don't buy into a lot of it. I didn't buy dumping the V6, especially something that was highly and ultra reliable to a fault almost. And you get this, now it's hybrid only, but when you look at fuel costs, and if fuel costs were to remain extremely high like they have been around the world, you see just how much sense this makes and how smart this brand is playing the long-term game, or long game. They do not look at some of these commodity type products like this van or sedans or some of their high volume SUVs as throwaway objects. And I have a lot more respect for that, doing this long term and seeing all these cars that you just forget about in like 5 years, and you could care less about it. But if you're buying this, you're owning it, or you have a huge loan, something that you're going to be paying off for years and years, you really start to think, I do not want to be dealing with a lot of headache with this, and that's exactly what this is attempting to do. So the reason that it's more quiet, the reason that it's more efficient, has a lot to do with what's under here. These panels, they've coated the entire underbody with panels, and this felt-like material looks almost like carpet across the whole center plane of the car. They've also routed air smoothly underneath, which this is an enormous vehicle, so that's a huge task when you still have a gasoline engine. But they were smart about it. Things like putting the exhaust or the muffler in the center part of the car, so not to impede the load floor in the back. And you see the whole load floor where the exhaust would typically be, or that muffler, it's all flat in the back. So it's smoothing out that air. So it reduces the wind turbulence, it increases efficiency, and then you have less road noise in the cabin. And that's one of the things I was surprised about, because if you get in the older minivans, you're like, God, this thing is, it's so noisy, the road noise, it feels like you're in a coffee can on the inside. And this doesn't have that even in the back. Now the other part is, because it's a hybrid system, 4-cylinder hybrid, the battery pack has been located under the driver and passenger seat, so that gives them more packaging considerations on the interior. It doesn't compromise too much in terms of interior cargo room and cargo volume and passenger volume. So doing that also allows them the flexibility of putting all-wheel drive. Instead of a mechanical differential in the back, it's just an electric motor that they can send power to when it's needed, and then they don't need the extra weight and complexity of a drive shaft. And now, the all-wheel drive system on here is nowhere near as good as something that's, physically connected and mechanical, but it doesn't need to be for this, because this is like that urban vehicle. So all of these things that they've done in terms of packaging have made it quieter, made it more efficient, and that's how partly one of the ways this monstrosity can get such good fuel economy. It rides softer, and it feels more like a luxury vehicle because it does share the platform with some of their higher end products. So, there's not a lot to complain about other than some of the performance things. It's not that quick compared to a lot of modern cars. But I'm going to take this for a drive briefly and walk you through what I really like and don't like about it. It's time to take a spin in the minivan evolved. No longer do we have to deal with this red thing that's in front of us. It's not a total turd on wheels, but ECVT, planetary gear set, continuously variable transmission. You have a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder combined with the hybrid electric system, which gives you decent amount of torque. The system will go into EV mode, which is just electric only during certain conditions, and that's the trick to balancing out fuel economy. And the reality is, the people that are going to be driving this, much like myself, are in a different level. I never get in here and think, I'm going to drive like an asshole, I never put it in sport mode. I never think about, oh man, well, let me check my tire pressures so I get better grip. I am throwing this in eco mode and just trying to maximize my fuel economy. Secondarily to that, I'm always stuck in traffic. This is a real commuter, so every time I'm behind the wheel, I get stuck somewhere. And when I'm stuck going 10 out of the speed limit in a 35-mile-an-hour zone, you know what? That's life. This gives you no pressure, no stress, and people look at you and they give you a break. If I'm driving like a dick because I need to get somewhere and I cut somebody off, it doesn't enrage them like if I was driving my Mercedes AMG CLA whatever number. You get a pass in life because the minivan is definitely not thought of as an asshole car. In fact, most people will try to get around you. So what's the big takeaways? Much like I talked about in the shop, all the work they've done on the chassis in terms of trying to make it more refined and quiet has worked. This is a very comfortable, it's a soft riding, without feeling like a boat, it's a soft riding, shut up! It's a soft riding van with decent grip, and the all-wheel drive, even though it's all-wheel drive, does a good job in every single situation. When I rip out of here, and I turn the wheel and I mash on the gas, it's not a disaster. The front end works, it transfers just enough power to the back where you don't get a bunch of plowing and understeer like I do in the traditional Hyundai and Kia products who can't seem to get rid of it. Now, yes, this is slow. It is definitely on the slower side. It doesn't inspire a lot of like tinglies in you if you need to get going. If you really, really need to get out, you have to plan it a bit more. But the benefit is of the eCVT is, unlike the hybrid Kia that I just got out of, well, there's no lag or delay in the transmission performance. The switch over between EV, if it's in EV, back to gasoline motor is absolutely imperceptible aside from the engine noise. It's a smooth, buttery experience that has been refined over the course of 15 plus years now in Toyota's portfolio, so you're getting their most developed version of their hybrid system, which leads me into my next point. I complained about them losing the V6, and now that gas prices are high, I think that in most cases it's not a big deal, because they stuck with nickel metal hydride here for a battery pack. You don't have to worry about expensive repair costs, so you can get a refurb pack around $1,500 and a new one for around $4,500, which if gas prices are $6 a gallon, $5 to $6 a gallon, you're going to not have to worry about what you're going to lose replacing a battery pack at the 150, 200,000 mile mark if you're driving it in extreme conditions. And if you're in ideal conditions, you may not even have to replace it at all. So it really goes back, is the 4-cylinder reliable? And mostly, yes. So the big thing, what am I getting in terms of fuel economy? Well, because I'm not driving this like an asshole, I'm almost exclusively in eco mode, tooling around. I've been getting an average of 36 miles per gallon, which is what they advertise. And I think that to me is one of the biggest selling points of this, aside from, you know, the utter usability, refinement of it. But I'm going to make some points in the final thoughts about kind of the things that I wish this had. It goes without saying, if you've seen any one of my videos, you'll know that I am a fan of the minivan. But that's different than actually going out and buying one. I found myself making excuses constantly why I don't want one. And even when getting rid of the XC90 for the X7, I'm like, well, I wanted the performance, I wanted the engine, I wanted transmission, I wanted handling, and I wanted the luxury features. And I think in some cases there's real truth to that for people like myself that may not particularly, I'm not in love with the SUV format, I've never been. But that's where all the money in the industry is going. That's what sells, so that's where you're seeing big budgets being blown on a million of these things. So like sedans are falling behind, and in the case of the minivan, you're stuck with kind of the commodity mass market version. And I think that to me is what's holding me back from crossing over completely. If they released a Lexus version of this, which they could easily do with good seats, a real audio system that they spent time on, with more luxury amenities in it in terms of comfort and technology packages and some of the things that make Lexus great in terms of like that highway cruiser, I would 100% be in a luxury van. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't love this, because I just spent almost 3 weeks moving things and just in and out of this thing, piling on the miles. And I would say when I had real things to do and people to move, 9 out of 10 times I would take the Sienna. And I would take it 9 out of 10 times, not just because it was easier to use and I could fit more in it, but because I was getting like 38 miles to the gallon, where in my X7, I'm barely getting 17. And that adds up when you're piling on the miles. And I don't care what it is that you're doing, those costs in this market are insane. They are essentially more than a car payment. So this saves a lot of money, and it still rides great. It still handles well, it's soft, and it does everything that you want it to do. It's just missing some of the polish and the finesse of more of a luxury product. But if you don't care about that and you just need it to be that purposeful utility, max out people, max out cargo, and do everything well, you're gonna love the Sienna. And it's something I'm really, really considering getting over my SUV. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video.